Yeah, we're ready to go now, Marie.
Okay.
Right, good morning, everyone, and good morning to any members of the public who are watching from the meeting. Welcome to a meeting of the Isle of Wight Pension Fund Committee. We're going live at 10:30, we're just a couple of minutes late. I'm Adrian Axford, I'm one of the elected councillors for Ryde, and I'm chairman of the committee. And we will quickly run through the members of the committee who are present. And let's see who is here. A couple of people have said they're going to be a bit late. But so far, we have got Mary Abraham is going to be late. Debbie Andre is here. Say hello, Debbie.
Good morning.
Paul Crading is here. Vanessa Churchman is here. Andrew Garrett is going to be a bit late. Graham Perks is here. Will you say hello, Graham? And Steve Milford is the employee representative. Is Steve here?
I'm here, yes.
Good morning, Steve. Welcome to the meeting.
Good morning.
And there is a number of officers, board members, and external representatives who are also in attendance. Have we had any apologies, please?
No, we've had no apologies.
No apologies, just apologies for being a few minutes late. Now we move on to housekeeping. There is new legislation in place which allows meetings to be held remotely by whichever means are available to the local authority, and that's why we're holding this meeting on Teams. Mobile phones should be switched off unless they're being used for the meeting. All participants should be reminded to allow for a slight pause prior to speaking for technology to catch up and display correctly. Please only speak when I ask you to do so, and the important thing is to remember to turn your microphone and video on before you speak. It's easy to forget that. Voting will be taken by a roll call, so the members of the committee will have their names called out in alphabetical order. When your name is called, please confirm whether you wish to vote for, against, or abstain. We now move to the agenda. Agenda item 1 is the minutes. So we want to confirm the minutes of the last meeting held on the 22nd of July this year. So can I ask members of the committee if you can advise me if there are any issues with the minutes from the last meeting? And otherwise, I will sign the minutes as a correct record. Anyone wish to say anything? In which case, we consider the minutes as approved, and I will sign them as a correct record. Thank you. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Members were asked to notify the clerk in advance of today's meeting to declare any interest they might have in the matters on the agenda. No declarations have been received, but there is still time. So any members of the committee, if you believe you have any interest that you haven't already declared, please indicate now via the chat function. I will leave you a couple of seconds to do that. Anything, Megan?
No.
No? In which case we move on. Item 3, public question time. Under this new system, members of the public have to submit questions in writing prior to the meeting. Have any questions been received, please?
No public questions have been received, Chairman.
No public questions have been received, so we move on to the main agenda. We are now on to item 4, the Governance Policy Annual Review. This is to consider amendments proposed to the Isle of Wight Council Pension Fund's Governance Policy and adopt the revised version on recommendation from the Pension Board, and this is covered in paper B, which you have received copies of. And this item will be presented by the Technical Finance Manager, Jo Thistlewood. So over to you, Jo.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee will be aware that this is one of the policies that's required by regulations to support the governance of the pension fund. Regulations require it is reviewed on an annual basis and republished if there are any significant changes. Appendix 1 to the report at paper B summarises the key areas of change since the last version, primarily being an expansion of the description of the role of the pension board and the inclusion of a new section within the policy in respect of investment pooling arrangements under the access pool. The pension board have been engaged in the changes being made and have reviewed and accepted the changes proposed, and the pension board recommends the adoption of the revised policy. I'm happy to take any questions, otherwise we'll move to the recommendation on page B3. Does anybody have any questions on the revised policy?
Can I just make a point for, we do have a couple of relatively new members of our committee. There are two different groups of people. One is what we are here, which is the Pension Fund Committee, and there is another one called the Pension Board, which is a separate committee made up of two members of the employers of the pension fund and two employees of the pension fund, and they deal a lot of the time to do with policy and governance, but they're not involved so much in investment, and that's why you're getting a lot of information passed to you by the board itself. So are there any questions that you would like to ask on paper B, please? Okay. In this case, there is a recommendation which is in page B3, which is the committee approves the governance for publication on the fund's website and for inclusion in the fund's annual report and accounts. I will propose that. So could someone please second that?
Yeah, that's Councillor Brading.
Councillor Brading has seconded it. So we will now move to the vote, which will be taken by a roll call. Can you say for, against or abstain, please?
Councillor Andre.
For.
Councillor Brading.
For.
Councillor Perks.
For.
And Councillor Axford.
For.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
That's unanimous. That is passed. Thank you very much, everybody. Now we move on to item 5, which is paper C, the Isle of Wight Pension Board Annual Report. Again, for newer members, you'll remember what I just said about the Pension Board compared to the Pension Fund Committee, which is us. This is to receive the annual report from the Isle of Wight Pension Board for the year ended 31st of March 2020, which is paper C. And do we have the chairman of the board, Tracy Bull, to present the report? Is Tracy with us?
Tracy has joined yet.
Is there anybody else from the pension board who can tell us whether Tracy is here? Or is there anybody else from the pension board at all?
Reg and Barbara are here.
Reg and Barbara are here. I will take advice on what we should do about this. Who do I take advice from?
If you wanted to move to the next item and then come back to this one, and hopefully we can try and get Tracy into the meeting, or you can just take the report.
With respect to the pension board, the paper is very self-explanatory.
Yeah.
We do have two members of the board available, which is Barbara Milton, who's one of their scheme member representatives, and Councillor Reg Barry, who's one of the employee representatives. I'm sure they'd be happy to take any questions if committee members do have any questions on the board. But the report basically summarises what the board has been doing over the last 12 months and the contributions that they've made in supporting the governance and administration of the pension fund, and the assurance that the board is providing to the committee that appropriate standards of governance and administration have been adhered to. So I think the best way to take this would be to say if committee members have any questions, and we can refer to one of the board members to make a response.
Thank you, Joe. Let's try that then. So the question is whether any members of the Pension Fund Committee wish to ask any questions on this item, which is the details are in paper C. Are there any questions for the board?
Paul Brading and then Debbie Andre.
Right, we have 2 questions then. Excellent. Are the members of the board present? Question.
Yeah, yeah.
Good. Thank you. It was Reg, I think, was it?
Yeah.
Thank you, Reg. In which case we will start off. Who was the first one?
First of all, we've got Councillor Brading.
So can we, Paul Brading, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Mine's a simple question, really. I know there's only 4 members of the board. I know they can have up to 8. I wonder why there's not that many on the board, and what is the core rate number for the board, the core rate percentage? I don't see that in the paper either. I'm just concerned there's only 4 members of the board and there should be more.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes, please, Reg.
It's quite simple, really. These sort of committees are nearly always short, as is the audit committee, the pension board. There's not the raving interest in it what there is in other boards, like things like, well, most committees are down, and I hate to say it, but it's one political party, the same party that you belong to. When you read the report, you'll see it's not as simple a job as what the chairman would have you believe. I thought his description of what the board does was very, what shall I say, light. It's quite busy, and there's a lot of work goes on that people aren't aware of. There's only 4 members because mainly it's finding people who's interested in it. That's what I think myself personally.
Okay,
I
thank
don't know
you.
whether Barbara agrees.
Sorry.
Barbara, you're on mute.
Barbara, do you want to say something? If so, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, it's showing unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay now.
The existing terms of reference state that we have 4 members. That by 4 members is the minimum statutory requirement. There's new terms for the board going through now, which will increase the potential membership up to 8 members. And we are currently looking for 2 new members, 1 employee and 1 employer member, because we realize we are quite a small group, fairly vulnerable because we are small. The core is 3 currently. I'm not quite sure. I think it will go up to 4. When we have 6 members, it will go up to 4. But we have to have 2. We have to have equal numbers of employee representatives and employer representatives. And you know, it's something we've been conscious of. We are working to increase the numbers. But it is difficult to recruit because we do have statutory obligations, which we are personally liable for. So in some ways, it's not a very attractive proposition to get into, especially when, you know, when you're talking about these days litigation and legal responsibilities. So it can be can appear to be quite onerous because of the statutory duties connected with the board.
Joe, do you have any comment to make on that?
Yes, if I could just say, part of the exercise that will be carried out on the 23rd of September is to begin the process for determining the recruitment of new board members. As Barbara has pointed out, statutes require there's a number of scheme member and employer representatives. Currently, we have 2 of each, one of whom of the employer representatives is from the council, which is where Councillor Barry fits in, and the other is Tracy Bull from the college, who represents the other employers within the fund. We are seeking to create a role profile for board members so that we can go out and advertise for interested members to attend. We haven't had the ability to do that, primarily because of work pressures for myself, but also due to other commitments within the board. And that's part of our work plan for the next 12 months to recruit members. I believe that we'll free when we go to an additional capacity, but the quorum will circulate. It has to be at least one member of the employee representatives and one member of the employer representatives to form quorum. So we can't have just 3 of the employee representatives or 3 of the employer representatives being quorum for the meeting. So we will be looking at that in more detail as the terms of reference are approved and roll forward.
Thank you. May I just say, Barbara, thank you for your clear, informative and non-political response. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Are you happy with that, Councillor Brading?
I am happy with the non-political response from Barbara. Yes, I am, yeah.
Yes, thank you. We also have a question from Debbie Andre. Debbie, would you like to ask your question, please?
Thank you, Adrian. It's interesting, actually, because my question did actually focus very much on the terms of reference. And again, thank you very much to both Barbara and Joe for your very clear responses. I was just going to just ask, in terms of the terms of reference, I note that it is a requirement that it is annually reviewed. Am I to think, and you've obviously said it does focus on the numbers and the fact that it is a very small committee, and that has been recognised in terms of the terms of reference being altered to allow for more members, albeit to maintain that equal balance. I do note, however, that although the committee is currently small, all members have actually attended all meetings. So the overall attendance is 100%. So I think that actually has to be noted. My sort of final question that hasn't really been answered is, I know it's a difficult one to answer, but what is the how is the board going about recruiting extra members? And I appreciate that there is a difficulty in this, but it would be good to actually see the expansion of the board. So how is it actually going about that recruitment process? And is there a sort of statutory requirement for that recruitment process?
Can I suggest that our officer answers that to start with, but I'm very happy for the members of the board to join in as well. So Joe Thistlewood, could you please provide the basis of an answer?
Yeah, thank you. The membership demands of the board are specified in statute that says there is a minimum of 2, a minimum number of 4 in total, which must be equal representatives of employee, scheme member and employer reps. We have not yet finalised the process by which the recruitment will be sought, but we are, as I say, the board are meeting on the 23rd of September, and part of the agenda of that will be to look at the additional recruitments and how we go about seeking additional employer representatives. As members will be aware, the pension fund has about 16,000 members in total, active, deferred and pensioner members, of which the council forms about 85% of that full membership. So therefore the council is the largest employer, but we don't want to put an additional elected member representative on the pension board, because the council will be seen, or could be seen at that point, to be dominating the pension board as well as dominating the decision-making process. So we need to be fully representative of all employers and all scheme members. So we will be discussing this at the pension board meeting, and the process for a role profile and recruitment process will be agreed at that stage. Could I just remind members as well that the board is not a committee of the council. It is not a political body. It is not created under the Local Government Act. It's created under the Public Services Pensions Act 2013, and therefore has no requirements for political proportionality, has no political agenda, and does not actually make any decisions. The board is there to support the scheme manager, i.e. in this case the Pension Fund Committee, in ensuring that appropriate standards of governance and administration are maintained, and that scheme members and scheme employers are appropriately reflected, and the views and objectives of the members and employers are appropriately reflected in the decision-making process of the council.
Thank you, Jo. Reg and Barbara, would you like to add anything to that?
Tracy is here now. She might like to comment.
Welcome, Tracy.
Hi, thank you. Well, no, just to say that, the change for numbers of members has been quite a recent introduction. So any sort of recruitment has been a little bit delayed by the current sort of pandemic situation, but it's something obviously that we are keen to do. But yeah, it's a recent introduction, so yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions on this item, please? In which case, can we note the report and thank Tracy for writing it all and sending it in, all the detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will, so that item is noted. We did have at the beginning of the meeting that we had several of the members of the committee who are going to arrive late. Can I ask Megan whether any of them have turned up yet?
Yes, I can see that we now have Councillor Garrett, and we have Councillor Churchman, and I think we're still waiting for Councillor Abraham to arrive. Okay,
so welcome to you, Andrew and Vanessa, and we're still waiting for Barry. We had a bit of a shambolic start because not everybody was here, but I would like to belatedly welcome Graham Perks as a member of the committee. It's the first time he's attended here. Thank you for coming, Graham. As somebody has just said, it might have been Reg. It's not the most popular committee to serve on. It's not frightfully covered with opportunities for electioneering, but we believe it's a very important committee when you think in terms of two things. One is that we control directly or indirectly investments of £600 million, a lot of money in anybody's checkbook, and we have, as members of the scheme, which the bulk of it is council employees, either current employees, retired employees, or people who've worked here but gone on to work somewhere else. We have 15,000 members of the pension fund. If you look in terms of the Isle of Wight, that's the equivalent of 10% of the population of the island, which is an awful lot of people. And so that's why we believe, for those two reasons, we believe this is very important. Okay, let's move on to the next item then. We're moving on to item 6, which is paper D. Got an echo in here. And this is to do with the Access Annual Report. Again, for the newcomers, a couple of years ago, more than that, a little bit more than that, the government decided that each individual county's pension fund was not going to have enough clout, and they decreed we should all group into a group of pension funds of different counties. So the amount of money involved was much larger, and we could use the economies of scale. So London boroughs all got together and did their own pool, and that left a lot of people around the outside of London who didn't have anywhere to join up with. So in effect, we joined on to the outside group, which, if you can imagine it, goes along the south coast from Hampshire eastwards to Kent, up the east coast, Suffolk, Norfolk, and inwards a bit to Herefordshire, Hertfordshire. So there are 11 county councils which group together and gradually, we are pooling our assets. In other words, we're putting all our assets together and they can be invested together. And that is called Access, which is some sort of acronym for something that somebody thought up. But anyway, it's easy to remember. We are members of Access, and every month or so, the chairman, there are 11 local authorities involved, and the 11 chairman of the county council pension funds get together, and we are in effect trustees or directors of the whole pool. Now, Joe will correct me if I'm wrong, but I mentioned just now that the assets of the Isle of Wight pension fund are £600 million. The assets of those 11 Access county council pension funds are £44 billion. That's a lot of money. £44 billion is controlled in the Access pool. But they haven't put all the assets together yet. They're in the process of doing it. And we're about halfway through, I suppose, at the moment. So I will now move on to item 6, which is the paper D, and our technical finance manager, Joe Thistlewood, will present this report.
Thank you, Councillor Axford. As Adrian has quite rightly outlined, this is an annual report from the Access pool. Access stands for a collaboration of Central, Eastern and Southern Shires, which collectively becomes Access. And as Adrian explained, there are 11 pension funds from around the South East and East engaged in it. This report is an annual report prepared by the Access pool and presented by Councillor Mark Kemp-G from Hampshire, who was the chairman of the Access Joint Committee. Sets out the key activities and the key achievements of the Access pool in the last financial year. The elected members from each of the 11 funds, including Councillor Axford, discussed this report at their joint committee meeting on the 17th of July and recommended the report for adoption by each of the individual pension funds involved in the pool. Effectively, this report will be published on the Access website and will form part of the annual reporting accounts for each of the 11 individual funds. So effectively, the committee are invited to adopt this report within their own annual reporting accounts for publication. Very happy to take any questions that anybody may have on this report at the moment.
Thank you, Joe. Are there any questions on this report, please?
I believe that Councillor Barry wanted to ask a question. We've just been advised he's having some IT issues and wishes to speak. But then we also have members of the committee. We have a question from Steve Milford and from Councillor Andre.
So who's first?
Steve Milford.
Steve Milford, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes, please, Chair. My question is on the very last page of the report, just 3 paragraphs up from where Mark G signed it. It's in respect of the ESG-RI policies. It says that Access will take views from authorities as to the development of its own guidelines. Firstly, I'd like to ask, can we have some input into that? And secondly, could we have or request from Access a copy of their own current ESG/RI guidelines so we know what the current state of play is and what we can comment on? Thank you.
Before I pass it over to Joe again for the benefit of any newcomers to the committee, we're getting into jargon here, I'm afraid. RI and ESG. RI is responsible investment. ESG, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, environmental, social and governance reviews. In effect, it's looking at factors other than making money when you're making investments, looking at environmental questions and that sort of thing. So that's, sorry, Steve, I know you know what it's all about. I'm trying to make sure that everybody else knows what we're talking about. I'll pass over to Joe now.
Yeah, thank you. Steve, absolutely. We are the Access pool is designed to facilitate the investment strategies of all of the 11 investment pension funds involved. We're in a little bit of a kind of chicken and egg situation as to where the ESG RI policies originate. There are some members of Access who believe that the pool should be driving the individual funds policies, and there are others who believe that the individual funds policies should be driving that of the pool. So we're in a little bit of a quandary at the moment as to which comes first to an extent. In terms of the Isle of Wight pension fund, we are working through our investment strategy work at the moment. So we've got an item on the agenda coming up on that, which will be one of the key items there is to determine our own strengths and focus in terms of the ESG and RI policies for ourselves. The Access guidelines at the moment are very high level and kind of summarise the general response of each of the 11 funds within, some of whom are much further on in the process than others. There is an Access Joint Committee meeting on Monday next week, Monday the 7th, and the agenda and papers for that have just been published. Part of that has an ESG-RI holding statement, effectively, to say where Access is. When I come out of this meeting, I will share with members of the committee and the board the ESG policy of Access, so that you can see what we're doing. But bear in mind, of course, that we are developing our own policy and our own processes, so we will have a say in the way that the Access guidelines are put together and the way that our own guidelines are put together. So we're kind of, as I say, chicken and egg situation at the moment, but we're trying to keep up to speed and get our own act in here as well.
Thank you, Joe. Are you happy with that?
Happy with that. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Who's next, please, Megan?
Next up is Councillor Andre.
Debbie Andre, would you like to ask your question, please?
Thank you, Chair. As a new member, I apologise to the seasoned members of this committee, but on page D4, the total fund is split into 3 sections: 51% outside the pool, 24% passive, and 25% sub-funds. Could perhaps the Officer Joe give a little bit more information? I'm sure it's all readily available, but it would be really good because to have it sort of clearly explained, just a little bit more about the nature of those individual fund groups. Thank you. And I also have a further question afterwards, but if that could be answered first, that would be good. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, of course, Debbie, thank you for your question. We're trying to pool £44 billion worth of assets from 11 different pension funds with different investment beliefs and different investment strategies. So as you can imagine, it's quite a big job to undertake that. When we started this back in 2018, I think central government determined that all pension fund assets should be pooled where possible by March 2021. So we've been on a long journey to get to the position that we're at. Currently, what the pool has done, what Access has done, is taken the low-hanging fruit. So effectively, of those 11 pension funds with their £44 billion, I think there was something like 700 different investment mandates that were being operated. So what we're trying to do is consolidate those down into a reasonable number of reasonably valued sub-funds to get the best value from the investment portfolios that we've got. So currently, to date, the fund has launched, I think, 17 or 18 sub-funds, which are basically where assets from more than one of the Access funds have been pooled together. There are processes in place to launch another 11 over the coming months, which will then bring a far greater proportion of the assets under pooled management. We've started with those easy asset classes, the liquid asset classes, so primarily equities, UK equities, global equities, and fixed income. And we're starting, and diversified growth as well. And we're starting now also to look at those more complex areas, the illiquid assets that aren't quite so readily marketable, so property, private equity, infrastructure, private debt, etc., etc. So we've got about, about 25% of our assets in pooled management. So those are the liquid funds that have been pooled. There's 50% that is not yet been pooled, some of which will be in the 11 funds that we've already got to launch, some of which is in the alternative markets that we haven't launched the sub-funds for yet. The other part of the pot effectively is the passive assets, which are where we're not using active fund managers, we're basically tracking indexes to get the required return. The way that those investment vehicles are structured are such that they can't form part of the mainstream pool effectively. So they are under pooled control in that 10 of the 11 funds who have passive management, we don't at the moment, have combined their purchasing power into a single passive fund manager. So they are pooled, but not in the pool vehicle, if you see what I mean. So hopefully that kind of explains a little bit more. What I'm planning to do, because it's been quite a long time since I've done a full update to the committee on access, is at the October meeting of the committee to have a more detailed session on the pool, where we are, how we're doing, how it's progressing. So I'll be able to give you a bit more information and more detail at that stage. But hopefully, Debbie, that answers your question at this time.
Thank you, that's great. So my understanding then, I think on page D5, it actually says the commencement of access activity in early 2016. So presumably, did we become a part of that as the Isle of Wight Council at the beginning, or was it 2018 that we actually became part of access?
In 2016, the requirements for pooling were introduced. But the legislation to govern pooling wasn't laid before Parliament until 2017-2018.
Right.
So 2016, we were working collaboratively within the access pool as a shadow pool to an extent, determining the best process and the governance arrangements. But we couldn't actually launch any sub-funds until 2018. So that's why different dates are there.
Thank you. So I'm right in thinking that the sub-funds are the collective pooled funds that are actively managed. The passive funds are, as you say, funds that are still considered to be within the collective pool, but basically ticking along and not actively managed. So 51% are funds that were originally with the individual authorities that remain with the individual authorities, but presumably, as you say, this is an ongoing process. So having got effectively 49% of the funds within the access pool and the most liquid assets, the process, the ongoing process now is to look at the funds that currently are part of that 51% to incorporate them into under the access management. Okay, and just one more, if I may, on page D5, the table that actually gives the actual in year and the cumulative, presumably under the cumulative, there is further information that is actually more detailed, because obviously cumulative will be from the start of the access fund. So is there, I'm assuming that there is a year-on-year build up, so that there's a further breakdown that is available within access. Obviously, we don't necessarily need to know that, but I think it's important to ask that question, because obviously just being given a cumulative figure doesn't necessarily give performance. And I think obviously, and I've also read within the papers that COVID inevitably has had an effect short term, but obviously we look more to the sort of long term view. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, Debbie, you are. This is the second or third annual report from Access. So the historic reports, which will be published will have the year-on-year build-up. As I say, when I come to do the report to the committee at the next meeting, I will provide more background information with more detail, etc., and give you some more information. It's a very, very complex situation. We, as a pension fund, have historically had a very simple asset allocation. So we've got UK equities, global equities, diversified growth, property, and bonds. So far, we, as the Isle of Wight Fund, have pulled our global equity and our diversified growth, which takes us to about 52% of our assets under management in the pool. We're currently putting our UK equities into the pool, and that will happen in November in one of the sub-funds to be launched. So that will take us to about 70%, just over 70% of our assets pooled. We've then got, as part of our investment strategy work, to look at what is the best place to put our bond portfolio, and we're working with Access Funds at the moment in terms of the liquids alternatives to see what we do with our property portfolio. So there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes. We're working as individual funds to do our own strategies, but we're also working collectively to put things in place that will help facilitate everybody's investment strategies as it goes through. But I will provide more information at the next meeting, and I'm happy to talk to you outside the meeting, Debbie, if it's helpful.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much, Jo. Thank you.
Okay then. Thank you. So who is next, please?
Next is Councillor Garrett.
Andrew Garrett, would you like to ask your question, please?
Thank you, Chair. It's more of a comment on the point that Mr. Milford was making earlier in the response there. How that the Access goes about this review of ESGRI guidelines I see it's going to be a very important test of the working relationships between authorities. And I'd be very pleased to see the sort of like the way they're scoping that and the way in which they could do it. Obviously it could be done by just an officers doing kind of a desktop comparison of authorities' views, but I think that here is a place for something that moves us from a potential for compromise with which everybody can live but feels just kind of nobody's very particularly happy, and synthesis around what actually are probably much more easily agreed long-term goals, outcomes, and principles, and that I think will be best driven through really digging down to really involving all of us on all of our various pension fund committees to bring forward those views. I know we've had those discussions in some of our training side of things, but I thought I see it also as this opportunity of here is where there might be some level of division, but actually how this group of 11 can work very successfully together and understand each other. So it's that sort of comment, and anything that those who are attending the Access meetings can do to drive a real openness and real sense of inclusion and engagement would be much appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, and now finally we've got Councillor Brading.
Councillor Brading.
Yeah.
Paul Brading, sorry to leave you to the end.
That's all right. I wasn't going to speak on this issue, but just a comment really. This comes out what Councillor Andre said actually. The one thing we've done well as a committee is that Councillor Axford decided that everyone should attend an Access meeting to share out the responsibility. And I found the Access meeting I attended was really informative. It's the way you learn about Access is to attend a meeting. A lot of other authorities send the same person all the time, so they don't spread the load and the understanding. But you know, we've all attended Access meetings now, and yeah, found it incredibly beneficial. Perhaps, you know, Councillor Andre, you'd benefit from attending an Access meeting because you see the diversities around the table. Everyone's got slightly different views, but they're working for the same goal, and it's quite an interesting meeting to attend. But yeah, there are so many different strategies and thought processes. To see how it all works into a fund and a collective decision is a good process. I think we've all benefited. I'm going to agree. We've all benefited from attending an Access meeting. I'm sure Councillor Garrett would agree with that as well. Attending a meeting has been really beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, I have tried to involve as many members of this committee in visiting. Well, in the old days, we used to have to go up to London. Nowadays, of course, they're held remotely, like this one here, so it's not quite the same atmosphere. But if any of the, I think I can make an open invitation. If any of the members of the committee would like to attend an access meeting in my as replacing me, I'd be happy to talk about it outside the meeting. Thank you, Paul. Is there anyone else who is indicated they wish to speak?
No one else.
In which case, where are we? This one is a voting one. So,
Chair, I'm sorry to come in. I think Councillor Churchman was indicating that she wished to speak.
I do, please.
sorry, Vanessa. Off you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, right. I just wanted to check on the on link. On page D3, it has a small paragraph there about link, and we were originally having problems with link organising and running the pool, and I wondered whether this had improved, or are we still sort of unhappy with them, and is there another solution, or are we going to stick with link? Thank you.
I would caution you, Vanessa, that this is a public meeting which can be watched by anybody, including the link management, so we have to be careful what we say.
Right, in that case, maybe we should discuss it in a different forum. Thank you.
Jo would like to make a comment on it, though.
We'll just say, Councillor Churchman, that discussions with Link are ongoing. The Joint Committee are aware of the issues that are in the process, and part of the agenda for the Joint Committee meeting on the 7th of September is to begin the process of what is being called a scheduled business as usual evaluation, which is looking at the operation of the pool at the end of its third year of formal operation, to determine how the process for continuing with Link, continuing with an alternative provider, or building our own pool after the end of the 5th year of the contract will start. So, as I say, we will do a more detailed report on access at the next meeting, and it will be held in confidential session so that we can have more in-depth discussion around some of the more meaty issues, shall we say.
Are you happy with that, Vanessa?
Yes, that's fine. I did realise that they did have a contract, I think, for the 3 years. So yes, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that all the questions on this particular item then before we go to the vote? In which case, you appreciate this is an Access annual report which is written and published by Access, not by us. But the simplest way of including it in our annual report, sorry, is just to add it to it, which is what we're proposing to do. So members are asked to adopt the report and to approve its publication in the Fund's annual report and accounts. And I will propose that. I would ask if someone could second it, please. Vanessa, thank you. And we will now move to the vote, which will be taken by a roll call.
Councillor Abraham.
Harry here now.
Oh, yeah, 4. I am.
Councillor Andre.
4.
Councillor Brading.
4.
Councillor Churchman.
4.
Councillor Garrett.
4.
Councillor Perks.
4.
And Councillor Axford.
4.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you, so that is passed. Now we move on to the equivalent of that report, but for us. So we're looking at the process for the pension fund itself, the annual report. This has been delayed because of COVID, and there is a complication because this pension fund annual report has to go to the Isle of Wight Council's audit committee as well to be approved and added, because we have a separate annual report and accounts for the pension fund to the annual report and accounts of the council. So the two of them have to be looked at together at a meeting of the a meeting of the audit fund. So I'll pass this one over to Joe Thistlewood to present the report, please.
Thank you, Adrian. Yes, as Councillor Axford has just explained, there are two elements to the pension fund's annual report and accounts. There is the pension fund accounts, and then there is the pension fund annual report. The accounts of the pension fund, there is no statutory obligation for the pension fund accounts to be published as a separate document, but they are required by law to be published as part of the annual financial statements of the Isle of Wight Council as administering authority. So the accounts of the pension fund are complete. The audit work on the accounts of the pension fund has been completed with no observations, no findings, and the accounts are ready for publication within the Isle of Wight Council accounts, which, as Adrian said, are scheduled to go to the September audit committee of the council for approval, subject to final audit. But there are some issues with the audit of the council's accounts, where an objection has been received in respect of Newport Harbour. Those members who have been around for a number of years will recall that this used to happen on a regular basis. We haven't had an objection for quite some time, but it has been raised this year. So there are some delays to the completion of the council's audit work, which may lead to a delay in the approval of the council's accounts, which will also include the accounts of the pension fund. The auditors at the moment for the council believe that the council's accounts may not be ready for approval at the September audit committee and may have to be approved in November. But that doesn't stop us as the pension fund approving the draft accounts as such and approving the draft annual report, which is a separate standalone document. So the annual report of the pension fund is required to be published by the 1st of December each year, and it includes the pension fund accounts that are included in the council's accounts, but also a lot of other documentation which is included in the report that I've presented to you at paper E. Thank you. I don't have a paper copy of the agenda, sorry. So at paper E, you'll see a big list of all of the documentation that is required to be included in the pension fund accounts, the pension fund annual report and accounts, and the process by which I'm intending to get it approved by the committee. Sorry, there's a lot of work that goes into this. The accounts, as I say, are done. They're the easy bit. It's then getting all the supplementary information around that has been slightly problematic this year, partly pandemic related, partly work commitment related as well. So what I'm proposing to do is circulate a lot of the supplementary information that needs to be adopted as part of the pension fund annual report to committee and board members outside the regular cycle of meetings, so that when we come to the October pension fund committee meeting and we present to you the full annual report and accounts for adoption at that stage, you will not have to see documentation for the first time. You will have had the opportunity to review, comment on the documentation before it is presented to you for approval, so that whilst the pack for the October meeting may be quite substantial, because the document will have to be published for the full document, will have to be published for public scrutiny, the discussion should hopefully be relatively straightforward, as you will have all had the opportunity to see and comment on the documentation that's included within that statement. Sorry, here we go. So the intention is that between now and the 28th of October, you will have seen all documentation to be included in the Pension Fund annual report. And at that October meeting, you will receive the full pack, which will either be including the accounts that have been approved at the September Council's Audit Committee meeting, or will be subject to approval at the November Audit Committee meeting at that stage. But we will then be able to pull together the annual report. You will have seen it, approved it, and as soon as the audit is completed, we can publish it on the Pension Fund's website. The Section 151 officer has been informed of the process that we're intending to follow through the paper that's been published in the pack today, and he is happy that this is the process to follow. I've also discussed this with the audit partner and the audit manager, and they are also happy with the process. In order to complete the annual report, the auditors need to complete a consistency opinion that basically says the information included in the annual report is consistent with that presented in the statement of accounts for the council. It's a complicated, complex matter and is made more complex by the inclusion of the pension fund accounts in the council's accounts rather than as a standalone entity. I apologise, this is a big rambly item. I'm happy to take any questions any members have. Otherwise, I'd like to move the recommendation.
Are there any questions or comments, please? In a sense, I will have to be liaison on this because I serve on the audit committee as well, and usually they look to me to make any comments to do with the pension fund accounts. We're dealing with it at audit committee level, but we'll see what happens this year. If there are no questions, then we will put this to the meeting. There's a big long recommendation, item 7, yes?
Yes.
I'll read it out.
E6.
It's on page E6. So members are asked to confirm the process for the completion and approval of the Pension Fund annual report and accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2020. And members are asked to agree to receive and comment where appropriate on the following documents forming part of the annual report between the committee meetings on the 2nd of September and the 28th of October, with a view to ensuring the swift approval of the full report at the 28th of October committee meeting. In other words, we're asking you to have a look at this before it arrives in the pack with the agenda. A, investment policy performance report for information. B, actuarial statement for employees. C, governance compliance statement in sections for comment. D, knowledge and skills compliance statements for comment. And E, risk management statement for comment. I will propose this. I would ask if someone could second it, please.
I believe that's Councillor Andre.
Councillor Andre, thank you. And we will now take a vote by a roll call.
Councillor Abraham.
For.
Councillor Andre.
For.
Councillor Brading.
For.
Councillor Churchman.
Are you there, Vanessa? Move on.
Councillor Garrett.
For.
Councillor Perks.
For.
And Councillor Axford.
For.
Vanessa, are you there? Have you frozen?
Frozen.
I think Vanessa has just dropped out of the call, but that
Okay.
would pass.
Treat it as an abstention.
Yeah.
It's not a close vote.
Yeah.
Is it? Thank you. So that is passed. Thank you, everyone. It's very complicated, but we may have a better idea at our next meeting of which way we're going.
It's Councillor Churchman here. I went offline. It came up on my screen. Something was wrong, but I was for the motion.
Okay, can you do that? Yeah, we will note that you are for the motion. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Are you
Thank
back
you.
with us now?
Yes, I'm back with you now.
Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to agenda item 8, which is the scheme changes. And this is to receive an update on recent developments in legislative requirements, statutory guidance, and requirements of the Pensions Regulator. And this is in paper F. And I'll ask Jo Thistlewood to present this report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just when you thought life couldn't get any more interesting in the pension fund world, central government decided to issue consultation documents just before the summer recess and help enable us to spend our whole summer worrying about administration issues and amendments to benefits. I apologise for the length of the paper, but there are some very complex issues just coming to light at the moment that will impact on the work of the pension fund, primarily in terms of administration over the next 12 months, probably. I'll start going through them in a little bit of order and probably in terms of complexity. I'll start off with McLeod. So members may recall back in July 2019, I gave a very brief summary of the position at that stage. Effectively, when public service pensions moved from a final salary pension scheme to a career average pension scheme, there were some transitional protections put in place for those members who were within 10 years of retirement to effectively give them an underpin to enable their benefits to be calculated on the best of the final salary or career average position when they came to retirement. Effectively, for the local government pension scheme, all members moved onto the new benefit structure, and everybody started accruing career average benefits from that stage. And those members who were within 10 years of retirement had the option to select either one of the best solutions. For the other public service schemes, and the fire scheme in particular, the old schemes were left open, but any new members joined the new career average scheme, and those members within 10 years of retirement stayed always on their old scheme, and those who were slightly older, or slightly younger, sorry, with more time to retirement, were tapered across into the new scheme at a transition date. Very, very complicated, resulting in about 9 different potential categories of membership for the fire pension scheme. For the LGPS, it was much more straightforward. So I'll focus on the LGPS issue at the moment. However, the challenge came from the fire service and the judicial pension schemes, but has been agreed to be applied. The remedy has been agreed to apply to all public service schemes. Effectively, this was an age discrimination case for those people who were not within 10 years of retirement, that they were being discriminated against in terms of their pension benefit. So it's now been agreed that the solution that's being consulted on at the moment is that all members who were active members of the local government pension scheme at March 2012 and were still active at the 1st of April 2014 when the new scheme came into force, are entitled to the best outcome of the final salary or career average scheme pensions when they come to retirement. We, as an administering authority, now have to go back and identify those members of the pension fund who could be impacted. So those members who were active at the 31st of March 2014, who are either still active, have left the service of the council or the other employer, and are waiting to become retired or who have retired, and also those members who have died and their impact on their survivors. We believe for the Isle of Wight Pension Fund, this could be as many as 4,000 impacted members, where we have to go and look at the benefits that have been calculated, the data that we hold, whether we hold full service history, which wasn't required by the career average scheme, so we wouldn't necessarily have collected that from the 1st of April 2014. And we've got to go back and backdate the salary information on our administration system. We've got to recalculate the benefits that have been paid to those members who have already retired and potentially pay some arrears. We've got to look at those survivor benefits and potentially recalculate those and pay some arrears. We've got to recalculate all of the benefits payable for the deferred members, and we've got to ensure that our systems are capable of matching final salary and career average salary for our active members until they retire. So that could be for the next 40 or so years that we have to make sure that we've got the right information for our active members, so that when they retire at 65 or 67 in the future, they have the right information to calculate their benefits. The cost of this is likely to be insignificant in terms of the total value of the fund. The key aspect is going to be a fundamental increase in the work of the administration team in identifying the members, obtaining the information from the employer in respect of salary information going back to 2014, and then inputting that onto the system and ensuring that the calculations are correct. We are working with our administration system providers, Haywards, to work through what the solution is, but there are a lot of work. There's a lot of work that needs to be undertaken in this. Members were invited to attend webinars, or have been invited to attend webinars. I know Tracy Bull, as chair of the board, attended a seminar on preparedness for the cloud. There are about 12 different work streams, including communications, member engagement, employer engagement, data analysis, data collection, data correction, etc., etc. So we're looking to pull together a project plan to cover this work, to make sure that we do it right for all of our members, and that our members have the right benefits paid at the right time in the right amount. The consultation on the remedy opened on the 16th of July and closes on the 8th of October. I am proposing to put in a response to that consultation from the Isle of Wight Fund, and will be sharing that response as and when it is drafted, so that members have the opportunity to comment where appropriate. I will also be sharing information as it arises from our actuarial advisors and from the other actuarial advisors within the scheme, so that members have the best information that's available to them, and I will keep you up to date with the work as it progresses. I'm very happy to do a training session at some point, if members would like it, on McLeod in more detail as the project progresses. I'm happy to take any questions at the moment on McLeod or the proposals as that stands before I move on to any of the other items on this agenda item.
Thank you, Jo. I think the McLeod issue is the biggest item on this, which we need to be concerned about. And as Jo said, it's not so much the extra bits and bobs of money which are going to be awarded to people. It's the huge amount of administration work which has got to be put in and records kept for years and years and years concerning it. It's what they call the law of unintended consequences. When they brought this, when they first decided to, in effect, try and help people who are just about to retire, they said, oh, well, we'll let them have a little bit of a soft landing. And then that was the unexpected consequence of that, was that everybody else said, hang on a minute, that's not fair, why should you get a soft landing and we don't? So they've changed it to McLeod, and again, I think there's a lot of unexpected consequences here too. They didn't actually realise how much detail there is going to keep the records. Are there any questions or comments on that particular part of this report, please? Not the whole report, just that particular part.
We have a question from Steve Milford.
Steve Milford, do you have a question, please? Can you unmute yourself? Steve, would you speak, please? I think you're still muted. Can you tell?
Yeah, I think it's still muted, Steve. We can't hear you.
So I keep pressing unmute and it seems to mute itself again. Joe, thanks for your explanation and for the paper, and appreciate it's a very complex area. So I think many of us would appreciate some training or a further detailed briefing if you are able to provide one. I was perhaps a little surprised at the numbers when you said 4,000 people could be affected. I guess it's a lot of people could be affected in a very small way, rather than you know people significantly out of pocket because of the changes. But yes, I would appreciate some further training briefing on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any other requests?
Councillor Churchman, yes. Have we any idea, Joe, how long this will take to resolve? Because it's reading the report, it sounds a colossal amount of work, and obviously your staff is not exactly overloaded with people who've, I mean, do you have to fit this into your normal work schedule? Thank you.
The answer to that, Vanessa, quite simply is yes. I personally will not be heavily involved in it other than overseeing the project to make sure that it happens. The majority of work, as we said, will be within the administration team. Identifying, just to kind of tip back onto Steve's point as well, to clarify the workloads. The 4,000 people that potentially are impacted are those members who were active at 2014 and who are either still active, deferred or retired at this point. So that's potentially the people that could be impacted. We haven't done a detailed analysis of whether they are impacted or not, but those are the ones that we can identify that are potential implications. Some of them won't have any impact at all. Some of them may have an impact and some of them will have a big issue. The priority has got to be, I think, working effectively in reverse order. So the retired members have got to be the #1 priority, because they are the ones whose benefits are in payment and who will be entitled to a arrears if there are any due. Then we need to look at the deferred members to identify who they are, that we've got the right information from them and be able to communicate with them and tell them what we're doing, so that when they come to retirement, we've got the right payment. And then the actives is really just a case of making sure that we've got the right data information available. In terms of workloads and timing, it depends really, Vanessa, on what the regulations say, what they say, how long we've got to implement it. There is talk of April 22 as being the deadline for this to be resolved. Given the fact that the consultation doesn't finish until October, and then the regulations will have to be laid through Parliament, we're thinking probably there is a 12-month window for the calculations to be undertaken and corrected. But that doesn't prevent us at the moment starting to analyse the work and identify who we need to be seeking data for, from whom, and how we go about getting that. So if, for example, on those 4,000 cases, each case took an hour to resolve, and we had a year to do all of those cases, that would mean we'd need about 2.5 additional full-time equivalents to focus purely on that to get that work done. If it went to 90 minutes per case, that goes up to 4.5 FTEs. If we've got 6 months to do it, you're talking between 5 and 10 FTEs of additional resource required to sort this out. We don't know that that is the case at the moment. We haven't done the detailed resource planning on that activity at the moment, but we know categorically that we do not have the capacity of our existing resources to do this on top of everything else that we've got to do as part of our business as usual. So part of the project plan, and a very early stage of the project plan is to identify resource requirements. We hope that the calculation and the data manipulation will be done automatically on the system, but we've still got to identify the members, we've got to identify the employers, we've got to seek information from the employers on the payroll information for those members for the last 6 years, etc., etc. So there's a lot of preparatory work that we can be doing at the moment before the actual calculations start, but that's part of the work plan. Matthew Collier from the administration team is meeting with our administration software providers this morning to begin a conversation about what solution they can put in forward to us, but that will cost money. This is going to be money and resource that we are going to have to pay for and fund out of the pension fund. There is scope within the response to the consultation to see whether central government can put some funding towards this, because this is work that we as the pension fund are having to do as a result of a correction of central government process and policy. So we are seeking to lobby for some additional funding. I'm not holding my breath on that at all, but we do need to bear in mind that we are trying to catch up with the correction of government thinking whilst also maintaining our normal business as usual standards. So the answer is we haven't got enough resource. We don't know exactly how much resource we need. We're putting together a business case to try and sort it through. Does that answer your questions?
Yes, it does. Thank you. A further question is will it be paid as a lump sum to people when the corrections are made? And secondly, what about HMRC? It just occurred to me, people who are currently paying tax, I presume, could then get a tax bill for the money that is paid to them by the council. Thank you.
I don't know the answer to those questions at the moment, Vanessa. We're at very, very early stages. I guess the intention would be if a member has been identified as being underpaid, then the amount would be paid in a lump sum and then their future benefits would be corrected. But as I say, we're very, very early in that stage at the moment. We don't know the implications, but we will be looking into tax implications for retired members, but also the implications potentially for annual allowances for higher paid employees, and also lifetime allowances, where it may mean that people's accrued pension pots exceed the allowable the amounts allowed for tax purposes and may incur additional tax bills. We will work through all of those as part of the project, and I will keep you informed as that goes through.
Yes, there will be a lot of detail. There will be a lot of detail involved in this, obviously. We'll keep everyone up to date with it as we go along. But some of the things we just don't know at the moment because nobody knows. I'll just make one point in that there will be extra administration costs involved in this, but these administration costs will be chargeable to the pension fund. They're not a direct charge on the county councils or the Isle of Wight councils budget, revenue budget. So it's not going to make any difference to the Isle of Wight council in the short term. Okay, is that the? That's it on the account, yeah. That's it on the account. That's one small part of this report. Now, Jo, would you like to deal with the rest of it?
Okay, the next section that I've mentioned is the cost control mechanism. This is a centrally driven activity that arose out of the last formal valuation of all public sector pension funds at 2016, where each scheme was looked at to determine its affordability for the pension schemes to be able to pay the future benefits and the income that's received into the schemes. Bear in mind, of course, there are two different types of schemes in public sector. There's the local government scheme, which is a funded scheme, so we have our assets, we have investment income that also contributes to the income coming into the fund, as well as member and employer contributions. Whereas the other public service schemes are what are called unfunded, effectively contributions collected from employer and employee are used to fund the benefits for those retired members, and any difference between the amount of contributions received and the benefits paid are either paid over to central government if the income is higher than the benefits paid out, or paid from central government to the pension scheme if the benefits paid are higher than the contributions received. And those schemes are funded as such by a notional pot within central government, a big black hole in central government funding for public service pension schemes other than the local government scheme. So the affordability of those public service, those unfunded public service schemes is very critical to central government budget processes. So what they're trying to do is to make sure that there is a limit on the black hole effectively that's funding the deficits by ensuring that income received or benefits paid out are amended to make them to balance them as best they can. So in 2016, following the valuation, the schemes, public service schemes, were deemed to be unaffordable in that the black hole was getting bigger. So they were looking at reviewing employer contributions for those unfunded schemes, which are centrally determined by government, or employee contributions, or changing the rate of accrual of pension benefits to try and balance up the income and expenditure. This had to be applied to the local government pension scheme as well, although that is slightly different in that employer contributions are determined on a triennial valuation basis, linking into investment income generated by the returns. But there was still a view that employer costs were too high, and so that there needed to be a rebalancing. This work had started to look at whether the benefit structure needed to be changed or the employee contributions need to be amended. And then the McLeod judgment was made that there was an impact on benefit accruals, etc. So the cost control mechanism was frozen at that point and nothing happened. But now the McLeod remedy has been determined and we're working through that solution. It's the Scheme Advisory Board and the HM Treasury are reinstating their cost control mechanisms. So there may be a further change to scheme regulations to amend the benefits. There may be a requirement to change the employee contributions. For the employers, it's less likely that there will be a change in contribution rate through the LGPS. But that work has got to start again. So this is a central government driven process that will determine changes to the scheme operation. It's been reinstated. Effectively, I will keep you informed as it develops as this goes through. The impact of this is likely to be on scheme members in terms of contributions payable or benefit structures, but that will be consulted on as that's decided. And as I say, for the LGPS, it's less likely to have an impact on employers. Any questions at that stage?
No question, that's it. I'm conscious of the time. I think perhaps we can just ask for any questions on the remaining items of this report. Everybody's had a chance to read them through.
Okay.
So the balance, we've got as far as items 16 to 19. Are there any questions, please, from paragraph 20 onwards in this report that you'd like Joe to answer? Okay, and in that case, the recommendation is that we note the update and that for future information will be provided on all items as implementation actions are developed. So I'm going to say that we have noted it, unless I have any objections from anyone. Are there any objections or questions, please, from any member of the committee? In that case, that item is noted. Right. So we move on to item 9, and this is a report from Hymans Robertson setting out a timeline, including meeting dates, covering all of the actions arising and work required to changes agreed as part of the investment strategy review exercise, which is detailed in paper G. And we have, do we have Emma Garrett present?
We do.
Welcome to the meeting, Emma, wherever you are. Oh, there you are.
Hello.
Good evening, hello. We're very pleased to welcome you to the meeting. Have you been there for long?
Yes, I've been listening in intently.
We'll ask questions from you later on. Okay, thank you very much. So, Emma Garrett from Hymans Robertson is an investment consultant, and she will present this report. If you go, Emma.
So the main report is Appendix 1 to the report in the agenda. And really the purpose of this item was to acknowledge that after the big deep dive strategy review we took to the July meeting, we made a lot of recommendations and decisions on how we wanted to improve the investment strategy. And that involved a couple of key things that I'll talk about in a second. But there was a recognition that it was a lot of work. And this paper essentially sets out a proposed plan of action. It has all the meeting dates that are scheduled for the committee over the next sort of 12 months, and then the work we propose and the order we propose doing it in for both committee meetings and development workshop sessions. There's 3 areas of focus that are covered in this work plan. One was considering an allocation to 2 new asset classes, that was private debt and infrastructure. And after this meeting today, we have a development session and training focused around those asset classes with a view to making an investment in them. We had a renewed focus on responsible investment and ESG considerations, how we can incorporate that into the investment strategy, and also taking on board committee members' beliefs in that area. So there's various sessions at both meetings and development workshops on that. And then last but not least, there was an item around restructuring the equity portfolio to get a better balance of assets between both active management and passive management, and also investing perhaps with a responsible investment focus. How can you do that as a fund, and what are the options available to you? So those are the 3 things, but you'll see that there are more than 3 items on this work plan. So the key takeaway from this is in order to make any larger strategic changes to your strategy, it probably does involve 3 or 4 meetings, because you've got a bit of a run up in terms of training, workshops, development, so that you understand the decisions you're making, and then also a formal proposal and also work to implement them after. So there is no decision to make on this paper. It's just setting out the horizon for how we plan on making the changes that were agreed as part of the investment strategy, and trying to align our focus in priority order for getting them done in the most efficient way. So happy to take questions on it. This will be subject to change. I'm sure things will be shuffled around depending on what's happening with other agendas and people's availability, etc. But this encompasses all the changes that were agreed as part of the strategic allocation. So if we can stick to this work plan over the next 12 months or so, then we'll be in a really good position for having implemented everything that was agreed as part of the investment strategy review.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Really what we're looking at now is page G5, which is Appendix 1, which is a list of proposed training and development sessions rolling right through till April of next year. I think that's just something on the back page. Oh no, sorry. Goes on to May, and 26th of May. Who will be on the committee by then? Who knows? That should be interesting. So are there any questions on either the report itself or on the dates or the reasons for the different training sessions?
We've got a question from Councillor Andre.
Maybe Andre, you have a question, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's really with regard to the training. Obviously, as a new member, I'm sort of starting from scratch, as it were. It's just a suggestion, but Chair, do you think it might be apropos to allocate certain topics to individual members rather than having an expectation that every member will attend every training session? Then it might enable individual members to focus on an area in more depth rather than having you know, a lesser view overview. It's just a suggestion.
Do you have any comment on that?
I think that's probably it's a sensible suggestion, given that everybody's commitment is there. But we do need to remember that the decisions need to be made by the committee as a whole. So there will need to be a report back to the full committee to make any decision effectively from whatever subgroup by nature is determined for each of the topics. So I don't think there's anything to stop us having subgroups. I'm just looking at Megan in terms of, I think we can set up some task and finish groups if that's what we want to do. But I think we need to make sure that we've got commitment from members to do that, and also then that the committee is happy to delegate some of the detailed work to those subgroups, and then make the subgroups make recommendations to full committee. It depends really on whether all members think they want to be involved, or whether they're happy to share the workload and delegate some decisions or detailed investigation and training, etc., to other members.
And how about you, Emma? Do you have a view on this?
I think it is important for decision making, particularly when we come round to the next strategy review, that committee members have a good understanding of what they're agreeing to, and also how they can then monitor the fund ongoing. If we are proposing making investments to new asset classes, you will be making further decisions on them and monitoring them going forward. And I think it's important that you have a broad understanding of all the fund's investments in order for you to still do your job as a committee. I'm not sure of the governance implications of having subgroups, but it is something that, as you've said, Joe, probably could be open to. The other option is, I appreciate there's new members to committee joining, and that will be the case ongoing, that you can have some new member specific investment training just outside of committee meetings. Happy to do that. Normally what happens on committees anyway, when we have somebody new joining, to bring their level of knowledge up.
I have made this point before, but Debbie, as you're relatively new to the committee, when we set up after the last lot of elections 3.5 years ago, I think we virtually a brand new committee, people who hadn't served on this committee at all before, and there's an awful lot of steep learning curves have taken place, and that includes myself. We hadn't been involved with the pension fund committee at all before, and so it was a lot of us had a lot to learn, and we still are, of course.
Sorry, Chair, at this point, can I just express my thanks to Jo, because she did actually give me a very good overview initial training. So I'd just like to say that I have already had that initial training, which I found incredibly useful. So thank you to Jo for giving that to me in the first instance.
So one of the things to all members, I am trying to work through an induction programme for new members. As Debbie mentioned, I have done an informal induction for Debbie, and I have offered similar to Councillor Perks if he has capacity to deal with that. But I am happy to do, and Emma as also said, we can do some outside briefings outside of the normal committee cycle if people have specific interests. I mean, in terms of policies and decision making, it is absolutely right that all members need to be aware of the decisions that are made, but potentially we could set up some working groups for the more specific, the ESG RI topic, for example. We could set up a group of interested members to help develop the policy, and then report back to that subgroup, report back to the main committee on the recommendations of the policies and the implementations thereof. So it's something we will bear in mind, but again, I think in terms of maintaining the level of knowledge in terms of asset classes and investment structures, etc., I think it needs to be a full committee decision at that, and full engagement at that point.
One other option we could consider is recording the development workshops so that people can view them in their own leisure if they can't make the meeting after committee.
Yes, that would be useful. Thank you. Good idea. We put that on our list. Debbie, you
Vanessa, I have a question. The committee meeting for the 28th of April could be a very important one, and that's a week before the election. As we're a politically proportional committee, will we actually be able to hold this, or would it be considered to be too political and it would come under PERDA rules?
Just to respond to that, at the moment, Councillor Churchman, we've left the meeting date in the calendar until such time as we are informed by the monitoring officer that we are not allowed to have, that it will be the pre-election period. So we have to plan that there is going to be a meeting on that date until we're told otherwise. If we're told otherwise, then we will reschedule the planning for that, the work for that meeting. I have also in my mind got the meeting on the 26th of May 2021 as an induction meeting for new members, or for the new revised, whatever form it takes, committee. So we will do a recap at that stage for members that are continuing or potentially new members at that stage, and we'll restart the cycle from that stage. But at the moment, until we're told otherwise, that meeting will be going ahead, but we will be flexible on that should we need to cancel it.
And I have made this plea before, but can all the elected members who are on this committee please make sure you all get re-elected next year? Otherwise, we've got to train a lot of new people up.
Comment from Councillor Brading.
Councillor Brading.
Yeah, I said 2 points actually. Joe's already answered the second one. With obviously members, some new members, you know, formal sort of structure of induction that I'm pleased to say Joe's working on, rather than do individual stuff, which is good, and also build it into the next council election. I think to the first point, I'm not against the idea of subgroups in some respects, but I think in this instance we shouldn't have them, because we're going to have to make some decisions going forward, some important ones around investment strategy. Without the training, I would abstain from the vote. So I think it's important that we all have that training, because we're going to have to get some, you know, decisions. And if we get if a couple of people miss the training but abstain with our small committee, we could have a few issues. So I think we should all have the training, because the decisions going forward are really important to make. So I agree with Emma's comment. Really, we should really all have it, and even stream it. People that miss the meeting, it's a great idea to record it for people that can't attend. So we're all on the same page when it comes to making the decision going forward.
I think that's a good, Paul. I think it's a good point, and we seem to be moving slightly from having a smaller number of people going to each of these training sessions to saying we try and get everybody to go to all of these training sessions, but we put on a few extra ones for those who would like specific items to be covered. And I take your point completely. Is there anyone else who'd like to comment, please? Nobody else on our list? In which case, because we're in effect, by voting for this, you're committing to coming to all these training sessions. It's a sneaky way that Joe's slipped it into the agenda. So if you go to page G3, the recommendation is that members are asked to note the future work plan and agree to the proposed workshops to progress the implementation of the revised strategy. I will propose it. Could someone second it, please?
I think that's Councillor Garrett.
Paul? I'm sorry. Andrew. We will go to a roll call, please.
Councillor Abraham.
Yeah, 4.
Councillor Andre.
Noted and agreed, 4.
Councillor Brading.
Yeah, absolutely 4.
Councillor Churchman.
4.
Councillor Garrett.
4.
Councillor Perks.
4.
And Councillor Axford.
4.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. That's carried unanimously. We've got to go on to item 10 in a moment, but I will take this opportunity just to remind you of what's been said. There is a development session, a training and development session, which follows this afternoon via a separate Teams meeting invitation, to which everyone is invited. The session will begin at 1 o'clock and will last for a maximum of 1 hour. topic is private debt and infrastructure asset classes, facilitated by Emma, who we have here from Hymans Robertson, and including a presentation from Courtney Benson and Robert Evans. Sorry, where are they from, Emma? Where's she gone?
They're from Partners Group.
From who?
Partners Group.
From Partners Group. So please don't all, I'm saying it now in case anybody goes rushing off at the end of this meeting in the confusion. Please come back from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Let's go on then to item 10. Some people have said there's an awful lot of stuff being circulated, and I'm afraid that's all down to me, because I'm fed up with having enormous agenda packs with 150 pages on it. And so what I've asked Joe to do is, with items which are in effect administration in between meetings, to circulate them to everybody. The one thing, it gives you a chance to read them in bite-sized pieces over the course of a few weeks, rather than having it all in one go over the weekend. But also so that it reduces the amount of paperwork which we send out, either by email or physically hard copies. So that's why you've had a lot of things circulated. There's a big long list there. So over to you, Joe, please.
Thank you, Chairman. There's really not a lot to say other than there has been a lot of information circulated, and I think there will be more information circulated, as we've agreed already that there will be parts of the annual report that is coming through that will come through to you in bite-sized chunks, and other information as it arises in terms of access developments and McLeod and other legislative changes. So please bear with us. Your appreciation, I do appreciate that you are all busy people outside of the Pension Fund Committee, but I want to try and streamline the meetings as best we can so that we don't spend a lot of time discussing details that we could have resolved outside of the meeting. So please bear with us, and any comments that you do have, and any time that you want to have more information about any of the information that is circulated, please do let me know. I'm happy to either put that as an agenda item on a committee meeting if more detail is required, or to do separate briefings for individual members if required. So I'm happy to take any questions on any of the documentation that was circulated.
Megan, have we got any requests?
No one's asking questions on this item. No.
No, okay then. We will consider those items noted. Item 11 is members' question time. Have we had any written questions, please?
No questions have been received.
No questions. In which case, can I remind you again, we've got the development session at 1 o'clock. Can I thank everyone for attending the meeting today, and look forward to seeing you in a 3/4 of an hour's time. And thank you for coming. Goodbye.